I had already given the order to kill it. My hunters were on the causeway with the fog to their waists, and the tide 2 hours out, and I was watching the marsh go the color of wet iron. And then a woman came out of the white with a covered bowl held against her chest, and stood in front of 11 armed men as though they were a wall she intended to walk through. "He hasn't eaten," she said. Sella, my captain, put a hand out to move her. The woman did not move. She looked past all of them to me. She picked me out of 11 men in fog in a plain cloak with nothing on me that said king, and she said it again, patiently, the way you repeat a Thai dower to a man who has been drinking. "He hasn't eaten, not since the 5th night. If you're going into the Wen tonight, you're going in after something that hasn't eaten in 6 days, and I'd like that written down somewhere, in case anyone asks later why it went badly." Nobody in Thallo talks to me like that. Nobody had in 9 years. I found I had walked forward before I decided to. "Who hasn't eaten?" I said. "I don't know," she said. "You brought supper for something, and you don't know what it is." "I bring supper for something, and I don't know what it is," she agreed. "That's a fair account of it. You can put your hand under the cloth if you like, it's still hot." Behind me, one of the hunters laughed, and I heard it stop when I turned my head. Her name, Sella told me later, was Neve Aldry. She kept the tide book for Saltro. Her father had kept it before her, and had drowned keeping it, and the town had a way of stepping around her in the market that I would come to understand better than I wanted to. They said she was unlucky. They said the water had taken her father and would want her too, eventually, and that in the meantime it was best not to stand too close. She said, "You're going after the marsh wolf." "I'm going after whatever has been coming out of the Wen onto the flats and standing over the sheepfolds at night," I said. "The town asked me. 3 times I'm answering." "It hasn't taken a sheep. It's been counted at the folds." "Standing," she said, "not taking. In 9 years it has not taken 1 sheep, 1 net, 1 child, 1 drunk asleep on the strand, and there are always drunks asleep on the strand, my lord. This is Saltro. If it wanted to eat us, it has had 9 years and no competition." She shifted the bowl to her hip. "It stands over the folds because the lambs make noise. I think it likes the noise." "You think," I said. "I think," she said. "You're the one who's certain, and you've got 11 men and torches, so I imagine certainty is going to win tonight. I only wanted it written down." Then she turned and walked back into the fog with her supper, along the causeway, toward the marsh, alone at dusk, in a country where the water can come up over a grown man in the time it takes to argue. I stood there with my orders still warm in my mouth. You should understand what the Wen is. Thallo is not land and it is not sea. It is the long argument between them. Twice a day the water comes up the flats and swallows the causeway that ties Greymere Keep to Saltro, and twice a day it goes out again and leaves black mud in channels and drowned stone. And in the middle of it, there is the Wen, 3 miles of reed and creek and the ruins of the old hold, where the ground is not ground and the water is not water, and men who go in without knowing the hours do not come out at all. And I knew the hours. That was the thing. In my blood from my mother's side, there is a sense of the waters turning as plain as knowing which way is down. Since I was small, I have never had to look. I could be asleep, drunk, bleeding in a cellar with no window, and I would know the sea's hour to the quarter. 31 years, and it had never once been wrong. So when I went out onto the causeway after her, and I did go, I told myself, to see where she took the bowl, I went with all the time in the world. The water came up an hour early. Not a rush. Thallo does not rush. The flood race comes along the creek beds first, filling them like veins, and by the time you feel it against your ankles, the causeway behind you is already gone. I turned and there was no road. I turned again and there was no marsh, only fog, and the black water coming up my shins with that dreadful patience, and somewhere far off a curlew, and my own heart going like a fist on a door. 31 years. I stood in water that should not have existed yet, and understood that my bones had stopped keeping the sea's time. They had started keeping hers. I cannot explain it better than that, and I have had years to try. Standing to my knees in the flood race, sick with confusion, I found that I knew, precisely, stupidly, the way I had always known the tide, that she was 40 paces off my left shoulder and coming back toward me. Not the water. Her. My whole inherited sense of the sea had been picked up and turned around and pointed at one woman in a fog, and it has never gone back. Then the bell started. That is the other thing about Saltro. There is a bell on the seawall, and the tidekeeper rings it when the water turns, and every man on the flats knows he has until the ringing stops to be off them. She had left her bowl on a stone, run the length of the causeway, hauled that rope until her hands opened, and come back for me. And when she found me, she did not say, "My lord," and she did not say, "I told you." She said, "Left hand, now there's a shelf. Walk where I walk and don't be clever." I walked where she walked. We came up onto the seawall at Saltro with the water at our backs and my men shouting somewhere out in the white. And she sat down on the stone and looked at her hands, which had opened on the rope, and said, "Well, you're the first." "The first what?" "The first person the bell ever got back." She said it without any weight at all, which is how I learned what it had cost her later. "My father rang it for 11 years. Nobody ever came in on it. They come in on the water, mostly, face down." She flexed her fingers. "I'd rather not have to write you down, my lord. The entry's long when it's a king." That is when she saw the fog move. "I want to be careful here. I have heard what the pack says about that night, and most of it is wrong. There was no howl. Nothing charged us. 20 paces down the wall, where the reeds start, something very large stood in the white and did not come closer and did not go away and looked at her for the length of about 6 breaths. Gray, not the size of a wolf. The size of a story about a wolf. I got up, my hand went to my knife the way a hand does, and Neve Aldry stood up beside me and said, quite calmly to the fog, "It's on the stone. It's gone cold by now, that's your own fault." And the fog was empty. She picked up her cloak. She was shaking, I noticed, and I noticed that she noticed me noticing and put it away like a woman folding a letter she did not intend to answer. "9 winters," I said. "9 winters," she said. "You've fed it since?" "Since the year the old king drowned," she said. "Yes, that winter, good night, my lord." She went home. I stood on the seawall in the dark with the water going out again, and I did not know the hour of it, and I did not care. And for the first time in 9 years, I did not want to be in my own hall. My brother's name was Ivor. I have not written that name down before. In Thallow, we do not say it. We say the old king, or your brother, or nothing, which is what most people choose. He was 6 years older than me, and he was better than me at every single thing that matters and several that don't. And on a night in the 9th winter before this one, he walked out onto the causeway at 10th bell, and the flood race took him. That is the testimony. Havard Crew, master of the causeway, gave it an open haul with his hat in his hands and his eyes wet. He had been 30 paces behind. He had shouted. He had seen the water take my brother sideways off the road in the dark, and he had gone in himself to the waist and been dragged back by 2 men, and he showed the hall his hands, which were torn, and the hall wept. And I was 19 years old, and I wept too, and then they put the crown on me because there was no one else. They never found him. That is not unusual here. The Wen keeps what it takes. We had a stone cut, and we had a service, and I have knelt at that stone every year on the night 9 times, and told a piece of carved rock that I was sorry I was late. Because I was late, that was mine. I was supposed to walk the causeway with him that night, and I was 19, and there was a girl in the town, and I was late. And by the time I came out onto the seawall, there was Crew in the mud with his hands torn, shouting my brother's name into black water. 9 years I have carried that. It is the reason I have the tide in my bones and no wife in my hall. It is the reason I said yes when the town asked me to kill the thing in the Wen, because there was finally something out in that water I could put a blade in. I went back to Saltro the next night. I told Cellar it was the hunt. Her house is the last one on the seawall, low, salt-eaten, with a window facing the marsh and a slate sill worn into a dip in the middle. She was not surprised to see me. She had a bowl on the table with a cloth over it, and she was writing in a great, ugly book with a cracked spine, and she did not stand up, which I found I liked. "You'll want to see it done properly," she said, "since you're here." She showed me. At dusk she filled the bowl, barley, mutton fat, whatever the boats brought, and she covered it, and she carried it 11 steps out and set it on the slate sill, and she did not look at the marsh while she did it. That was a rule, apparently. She'd worked it out the 2nd winter. If she looked, it did not come. And in the mornings, the bowl's on the sill, empty, clean. She said it flatly, but there was something underneath. Not licked, clean, set upright in the middle. 9 winters, and it has never once been knocked over. And one night in the 3rd year there was frost, and it had been moved off the sill onto the doorstep, out of the wind, where it wouldn't crack. I looked at her. "Yes," she said, "I know." Does the town know? The town knows I'm strange and unlucky, and they'd rather I stayed at the end of the wall, she said. That covers most of it. They don't ask what I do at dusk. She closed the book. Anyway, I stopped telling people in the fourth winter. You tell a man his dead don't come back and he agrees. You tell him something eats out of your window and stacks the bowl and he's frightened of you. Why do you keep doing it? She was quiet long enough that I heard the water. The first night I did it, she said, I hadn't meant anything by it. My father had been gone a year and I'd cooked for 2 out of habit, you do, and I couldn't eat it and I couldn't throw it out and I put it on the sill because I was angry, I think. At the water, a stupid thing, petty. She turned the pen over. In the morning the bowl was clean and it was the first morning since he drowned that I got out of bed without arguing with myself about it. So I did it again. For 9 winters. It's a bowl of barley, my lord, she said. It costs me nothing, and somewhere out there something is alive that isn't alive because of anyone else. She looked up. You're a king. You've spent 9 years feeding a country. Don't pretend you don't understand what a bowl on a sill is for. I stayed. I told myself it was the hunt. I came back the next night, and the night after, and by the 6th I had stopped saying the word hunt out loud because Sella had started looking at the ceiling when I used it. I sat in a salt-eaten house at the end of the wall and watched a woman write down the hours of the water, and I learned things. I learned that she counted everything. Steps, bells, breaths, the number of boats out and the number back, and if the second number was smaller, she wrote the names. I learned that she was not gentle exactly, she was accurate, which in Thallo is a kind of tenderness. I learned that she had never once asked me for anything, which no one else in my life has managed. And I learned that my bones had gone over to her entirely. I would be in Graymere, 3 miles off in a room with no window, and I would know she was at the wall. Not think. No, the same certainty I had spent 31 years spending on the sea. It should have frightened me. It did frighten me. But there was a night I came in out of the rain, and she was asleep at the table with her cheek on that ugly book. And my heart did the thing it does at the turn of the tide. That lift, that going over, and I stood in the doorway and understood exactly what had happened to me and how long ago it had happened and how little say I had ever had in it. I did not wake her. I put the bowl out myself 11 steps without looking at the marsh. In the morning it was clean and set upright in the middle. The tide book was her father's before it was hers. She kept it because the fishermen needed it, and because the keep paid her 4 marks a year, and because she would have kept it for nothing, which is the truth and which I did not say. Every day of every year since her grandfather's time. The hour of the turn, the height, the weather, the wrecks. 900 pages of the water saying the same thing in a slightly different voice. I asked to see the 9th winter because I could not help myself. I wanted to read the entry. I wanted to know what she had written on the night my brother died. I had some sick idea it would say something, that the water would have marked it. She found the page and turned the book around and pushed it at me, and went to bank the fire. The entry was 4 lines. It was not about my brother at all. It said the wind, and it said the height, and it said the hour of the turn. I read the hour of the turn 3 times. Niamh. Something in my voice brought her round from the fire faster than my hand ever could have. This says the water turned at midnight. midnight. Then it turned at midnight. It says the causeway was dry until midnight. That's what a turn at midnight means, yes. Havard Crew swore in open hall that the flood race took my brother off the causeway at 10th bell, I said. He swore it. He showed them his hands. 10th bell is 2.5 hours before this. The fire made its small noise. Niamh Aldry stood very still, and I watched a woman who counts things count something. Then either my father wrote the tide down wrong on the one night in 11 years he wrote it wrong, she said slowly. Or the master of the causeway told your hall that a man was swept off a road that was dry enough to sleep on. Neither of us said the third thing. We did not have to. It came up in that room like the water comes up the creeks, from underneath, everywhere at once, and by the time you feel it, there is no road behind you. Say it, I said. No, she said. You say it, you're the one who's certain. My brother did not drown. Your brother did not drown at 10th bell, she said, on a dry causeway in front of a man whose hands were torn. And then, because she is honest even when it costs, my lord, hands get torn on rope, on stone. On a great many things that aren't water. I was on my feet. I do not remember standing up. Sit down, she said. Do you know what you're saying? I know exactly what I'm saying, and I'm saying it in a house at the end of a wall with one door, so sit down and think." She put her hand flat on the book, not a large hand. "This is the only page in Thallo that says so. If you go up to that keep tonight and shout, then by the morning there will be a fire in my house, or a hole in this book, or a very sad entry about a strange, unlucky woman who fell off the seawall, and Havard crew will bring your brother's murder to my funeral and cry at it." The word sat in the room with us. She had said it, and I had not. "You're not frightened," I said. "I'm extremely frightened," said Niamh Aldrey. "I'm just also right." 3 nights later the bell rope was cut. Not frayed. Cut 4 feet up, clean, and left hanging so that you would not see it from the wall, so that you would only find out when the water turned, and you hauled and got a length of rope in your hands and no sound in the sky. She found it at dusk. She told me at the door with her jaw set and her voice level and a small dead calm in her that was worse than crying. "There are 9 boats out," she said. We rang it with my sword belt and a boat hook and sella standing on my shoulders, and we got the sound up over the flats 4 minutes late, and 9 boats came in, and the town stood on the wall in the dark and watched their king ring a bell like a boy, and nobody said anything, and Havard crew stood at the back with his hat in his hands and a face full of decent, weathered concern, and I looked at that face for a long time. That night I asked her to come to Graymere. Walls, guards, a room with a fire that draws. I said it badly twice. "No," she said. "Niamh." "No, and I want you to hear the whole of the no." She sat down across from me. "If I come up to your hold, the book comes with me, and then it's the king's book, and when you read it out in your own hall, every man in it will say, of course it says that. He's had it a month. It has to stay where the town can see where it's been." She turned the pen over. "And if I come up to your hold, nobody feeds him." "That is the thing in the marsh." "Yes," she said. "And he hasn't eaten since the 5th night, and I've been sick about it every hour since, and now you've cost him 9 more days with your torches, and I'd like that written down too." I sat back. I had ordered men to their deaths with less argument. I said, "Then I'll put 6 men on this wall." "Put 2, she said. 6 is a message. 2 is a patrol. You would have made a very frightening captain." "I make an adequate tidekeeper and a poor neighbor," she said. 2 men, my lord." I put 4. She counted them, of course, and said nothing, and I have never in my life been so pleased to be scolded by silence. And before I went, because I had learned by then what she would and would not stand, I said it plainly at the door in the rain with my hand still on the latch. "When this is finished, whatever it turns out to be, I am going to come back to this door and ask you something." I made myself say the rest. "And you are free to say no, and I want you to know now that no is a real answer and it costs you nothing, not the book, not the 4 marks, not the men on this wall, not one thing. Those stay whatever you say. I'll not have you owing me a yes." Niamh Aldrey looked at me for a while. The rain came down the wall. "That's a very long way of asking," she said. "I'm told I'm thorough." "Go home, my lord," she said, and shut the door, and I stood in the rain like a fool, and I heard through a door in Thallo in the 9th winter a woman laugh. The bowl came back on the 11th night. She had put it out at dusk, 11 steps, no looking. In the morning it was on the sill, upright, clean in the middle. And in the bottom of it there was a small iron disc, mud black, with a hole through the top where a cord had been. She brought it to me at the keep herself. She would not give it to the men at the gate. She stood in the yard in the wind with her fist closed and made them fetch me, and when I came out she opened her hand and the world stopped moving. A causeway token. Iron. Every master of the causeway carries one, and every heir of Thallo is given one at 10 years old, the old rite, the road across the water, the thing you press into a stranger's palm to say, "Walk with me, I'll answer for the tide." There are 2 in the country. One hangs at Havard crew's belt where the whole town can see it. The other one went into the Wen 9 years ago on a cord around my brother's neck. I turned it over. On the back, cut small and crooked, the way a boy cuts things when he is meant to be at his lessons, a wolf with too many legs. He was 9 when he did that. He was proud of it. Our father had been furious. I heard myself make a sound I have not made since I was 19. Niamh Aldrey put her hand on my arm. That was all. She did not say anything, and she did not say anything for a long time, and in 9 years of a whole country telling me how sorry it was, that was the first time anyone had got it right. 9 winters, I said when I could. 9 winters you've been feeding. Don't, she said. Not yet. It could be a token in the mud. It could be a bird. It could be 100 things, and if you go up those stairs now with your face like that, you'll lose him. Him, I said. Niamh Aldry, who counts things, who is accurate, who does not say a thing she cannot write down, looked at the iron in my hand and said, I've been putting a bowl out for 9 winters, and it has never once been knocked over. We went out at the turn. Not with hunters, not with torches. Me and Sella and Niamh with her lantern shuttered and her book left behind on the table, out along the causeway with the water coming up the creeks on both sides and the fog so thick the lantern only lit the fog. It was Niamh who stopped. My bones had stopped keeping the sea's time long since, but hers hadn't. She put a hand out flat and said, Here, this is where the flood race comes over. He'll be up on the old stone. He always goes up when it comes. How do you know where he goes? Because I've listened to him from my window for 9 years, she said, and he goes up when the water comes like anything with sense. And then it was in front of us. Not charging. Standing 20 paces off in the white, that enormous gray shape, streaming, and I felt Sella's hand go to her sword, and I said, No, and she took it off. And we 3 stood in the flooding dark and looked at the thing that had eaten out of a window for 9 winters. It looked at Niamh, then it looked at me, and it took 1 step back. That was what broke me, not the size of it. It knew me, and it stepped back, and I have thought about that step every day since, because it means that somewhere in 9 years of black water and reed and cold, something had gone on being ashamed. I said, Ivor. Nothing. The fog moved. The water came up over my boots. Niamh Aldry stepped past me, past a king, past a drawn guard, into 6 feet of nothing with a shuttered lantern in her hand, and she did not shout. She said it the way she says the hour to a drunk, flat, certain, patient. 9 years of practice at saying a true thing to something that would not answer. Ivor, she said, it's on the sill. It'll go cold. Come and eat it while it's hot, you great idiot. I've been doing this for 9 years. And the thing in the marsh made a sound. I will not try to write it. It was not a howl. It was the noise a door makes when it has been swollen shut for a long time and someone leans on it. Then it went down into the water, and the water closed, and Sella swore, and I went into my thighs after it, and a hand came up out of the flood race and took my wrist. A hand, bones and cold, and 9 years of dirt. A man's hand. I sat down in the black water of my own country with my brother's head against my shoulder, and I held on to him while the tide came in around us. And Niamh Aldry stood over the both of us with her lantern open at last, and rang no bell at all, because there was nobody left out on the flats to call home. They call it the Wolflock. The old women in Saltro knew the word. Nobody in the keep did. A man goes into his wolf to survive a thing his mind will not survive, and if he stays too long the door swells shut behind him. Cold does it. Drowning does it. Being hunted by your own country does it. 9 years, and there was not a scholar in Thallow who had ever heard of it lasting more than a season, and there is not one now who will say the word impossible to my face. He could not speak for 11 days. He could barely stand. He flinched from the fire and would not sleep under a roof and would only eat, at first, out of one particular bowl, which Niamh Aldry brought up the causeway herself and set on the sill of the king's own window like it was nothing. And on the 12th day I put the iron token in his hand and asked him one question. And my brother, the true king of Thallow, 38 years old, gray as the marsh, sitting in a chair he had been born to, looked at it for a long moment and then said, in a voice like a boat being dragged over shingle, the first word he had said in 9 winters. Roand, that is all my name. I have been given a crown, a country, and the water in my blood. Nothing has ever been handed to me like that word was. The haul took 4 hours. I want to be honest about it, because there was no lightning and nobody bowed. Havard Crew stood in front of the whole town with his hat in his hands and cried at my brother and called it a miracle. And for a very bad quarter of an hour I watched him nearly get away with it a second time, because he was weeping, and Ivor could not speak, and a man's tears are louder than a silent man in any hall you will ever stand in. Then Niamh Aldry brought the book in. She would not read it. She said the town should read it, and she made them do it. She put that ugly cracked spine ledger into the hands of the harbor master, who cannot stand her, who has crossed the market to avoid her for 9 years, and made him read out the hour of the turn on the night the old king drowned in her father's handwriting, on a page that had sat in a house at the end of the sea wall, since before anyone in that room had a reason to lie. midnight, and the harbor master who cannot stand her stopped reading, and looked up, and said into a silent hall, in the voice of a man who has spent 40 years on that water and cannot make himself unsay a tide, "Then the road was dry at 10th bell." The rest was only arithmetic. That is what Crew never understood about her. He had spent 9 years managing men, and men can be wept at. She handed him a number. He had been taking the wrecking money off the Wen for 11 years, and my brother had found the ledger for it, and was going to end it on the 8th day of that winter. And so, on the 7th night, the master of the causeway walked out onto a dry road behind his king with a boat hook in his hands. He is alive. People ask me that. He is alive in a cell in Graymere with a window on the flats, and every day of his life he can hear the bell at Saltro ring when the water turns, and I am told he has stopped being able to sleep through it. I did not design that. I only declined to move him. Ivor would not take the crown back. I fought him about it for a month. I told him it was his, that I had only ever been keeping it, that I had been 19 and late, and it had never been mine for 1 hour. He heard me out. He was speaking by then in that drag-shingle voice, 10 words at a time on a good day, and when I ran out, he said, "You kept it warm." And then, because 9 years in a marsh does not improve a man's manners, "Sit down, Roan. You've been standing since I drowned." He lives on the wall now, 3 doors up from the last house. He mends nets badly. He will not sleep in the keep, and he will not cross the causeway at flood, and he does not like halls. And once a year he comes up on the night of the 7th and eats at my table and goes home. And that is the whole of my brother's public life, and he is content, and I have stopped apologizing to a piece of carved rock. And in the spring, I went to a door at the end of the seawall in the rain. I had it all prepared. I am thorough. I had made a whole architecture of it, the freedom of the no, the 4 marks, the men on the wall, the book stays hers, all of it laid out like a treaty, because I had spent my life being certain about the water, and I had exactly no idea how to be uncertain in front of one woman. I got about 9 words in. "Roan," said Niamh Aldry from her own doorway with flour on her hands and the marsh at her back. "Come in. It's on the table and it's getting cold." I said, "That isn't an answer." "It's the only kind of answer I've ever given anybody," she said. "You've watched me give it for 9 winters. Come in before it cools, my lord, or I'll be extremely offended and I write things down." So I went in. She is Lunar of Thallow now, which she says is a great deal of noise about a woman who owns 1 book. The hall calls her my lady, and she corrects them to Niamh about 4 times a year and has never once won. She still keeps the tides. She would not give that up for a crown, and I would not ask. There is a bell on the seawall at Saltro, and she has never yet let it ring late, and there is not a man on that water who does not know whose hand is on the rope. My bones have never gone back to the sea. I have made my peace with it. I do not know the hour of the turn anymore. I have to look at the book like everybody else, which the fishermen find enormously funny. But I have never once, in all the years since, not known where she is. And at dusk, at the last house on the wall, there is still a bowl on the slate sill. She let me take the job over. 11 steps, no looking at the marsh. Some nights it is still there in the morning, and some nights it is clean and set upright in the middle. And my brother has never in his life admitted to either, and none of us has ever asked. That is what a house is in Thallow, not the walls, not the fire. Something out in the dark that you cannot see, and a bowl you put out anyway, and the walking back inside before it cools.